Thrilled to welcome here to Artyard the director, co-director of this movie, and the son of the great Bert Berns, Brett Berns. And really a surprise treat for me. Gary Sherman, the arranger.
We're all a little scared.
I know. Is it working? Okay. You can hear me? Yeah. Hey. So, oh, you're going to do that? I guess this is maybe the third time I've seen this. It just really takes a piece of my heart. I love the movie, and congratulations. And you know, so you were about 2 years old when your father passed away?
Yeah, I was about 2 and 2.5. My sister was 10 months old, and my little brother was 2 weeks old. So we had like 3 kids, and she had 3 kids in 3 years, and you know, it was just like living as much life as he could in the time that he had, and that was really, you know, one of the main sort of discoveries is like that kinetic energy that he had and translated into his music. Also, at his home life, having, you know, 3 kids in 3 years like that. So.
And you grew up with your mom and your sister and brother in Jersey, and like how old were you when you started to become conscious of who your father was and what he had done?
We never moved into the house in Tenafly because he died. We were supposed to move in on that Monday, and he died that weekend. So the whole thing went into, you know, sort of an estate battle that was really ugly, you know, between my mother and his family. But so I was gonna grow up and be a Jersey boy, you know, and in Tenafly. But we stayed in the city for a couple of years longer, and then she moved us to Atlanta, Georgia, where I spent my entire childhood sort of in the oblivion of the South, and it was wonderful. And I heard stories about my dad. You know, my mom was the star of our lives. She discovered Paul Davis, the singer who behind hits like I Go Crazy and a bunch of 70s sort of soft pop hits, and Paul was like a father figure to me growing up.
So she stayed in the music?
Yes, but I mean, she really wasn't in the music business. She was a go-go dancer, you know, and a model, and you know, but she was smart, and she, like, after my dad died, she just sort of sat there in the office wearing his jacket and not knowing what to do because Neil Diamond and Van Morrison and all the artists left. She had a label with no artists on it, and you know, Tommy and Patty and those guys would just come sit in the office because they felt closer to Bert. And she didn't know what to do, and so she kind of released some Neil Diamond tracks and things like that, and then she discovered Paul Davis and moved us to Atlanta. And so I would hear stories about my dad. You know, she would, you know, tell me things here and there. There were like those telling details, like when she would get sicker and she would crawl into bed with me in the middle of the night and start crying and say, you know, your father wasn't a gangster. I don't ever want you to think that your father was a gangster. And I just was like, you know, 7, 8 years old. I had no idea what she was talking about. And you know, she'd tell us he was a Zionist and he wanted to fight in the 6-Day War, and you know, he had all these great stories about him that became clues for me. And then when I got to be sort of age, and I, you know, so I wanted to kind of find out who my dad was. I had no idea. I mean, I really had no idea about the mob stuff and how deep it went. I didn't know really anything.
Did you know his music? Did you
I
have
knew
his
like
records around the house?
I knew the top hits, you know, and like
Right.
that was it. I didn't know, you know, the vast majority of the songs that are sort of playing in the film. All the songs in the film pretty much are my dad's songs, even the obscure songs. But I didn't know. I knew that he was a Zionist. I knew that he wrote Twist and Shout. I knew, you know, I'd heard whispers about connections to the mob and things like that, but I just didn't. My mother was the giant star of our lives. I just can't say enough about, you know. And then I graduated college.
She's the star of this movie too.
She is.
What a personality.
She just saw the film last week at the Miami Jewish Film Festival for the first time on a big screen.
Oh, wow.
It was really great. She joined us for the talk back, and it was cool. Yeah, and so I went to Israel to sort of, you know, I don't know, a lot of reasons, but to get closer to my dad, maybe to make my dad proud of me, and I wanted to be a paratrooper in the Israeli army, so I made Aliyah, and I became a paratrooper in the Israeli army, and I came back after, you know, like when ambush ambush with Hezbollah one day. I was in a firefight one day. The next day I was back in the States. And we learned that the copyrights were coming back to us and that the copyrights revert back to the heirs if the author dies in the first term of copyright. I mean, it's kind of complicated, but not really that complicated. And I had no idea that this was going to happen. And that became the sort of catalyst.
How old were you then?
Just in my mid-20s, right after the Army. Yeah. So.
Right. And when did the idea of this movie start to take shape for you? There was a book written about your dad, right? And,
yeah.
So
the Joel Selden, the guy with the
author.
funny beard, who, and if you ask my mom, like, I said, what did you think of the film? And she goes, I like 90% of it. And I'm like, well, what part did you not like? She hates Joel Selden. She's like, that son of a bitch. She just can't stand him. That's a long story why.
She didn't cooperate with the book?
She did. She gave an interview, and the book ended up like in litigation, and it got shelved for 10 years, and that's why. I mean, like, things like that happen, which is weird because now the man is one of my closest friends in the world, and second chances, But Joel really was one of the great sort of, again, catalysts for our discovery, because he was the guy who got all those records and connected the dots, and he's like the Mickey Spillane of rock and roll journalism. So he had heard about the mob stuff, and he was interested in that. And when we met each other, he just like took us and he says, "I want to write the book about your dad, and you guys are gonna have to help me, to do the interviews." And I mean, we opened the world to Joel, and the book just it wasn't the book I thought that I wanted, and it fell apart. And so after we sort of had an amicable settlement with him, I thought, all right, you know what, I'm gonna pick up this, and I'm gonna, as the oldest son, figure out the way to tell my dad's story. Documentary. I'm going to start interviewing his friends and get these kind of guys.
You had no filmmaking background, right?
I had
You
never made a
not
home movie.
picked up a camera or
Never. No, it was like the wrong guy to do this, really. But I knew enough to find brilliant people at every turn, and I'm standing on the shoulders of a lot of giants who made this film with me. I just thought, okay, I'm going to start interviewing people that are closest to us, and that was Wazzle. And
was
Jerry.
he in your life growing up? Like, had he stayed connected to your family?
No. Like, people said to me, "Why'd your mom move to Atlanta?" And I think one of the reasons was, just to sort of get a fresh start and away from like all those guys. And so I heard about him, but I didn't know him. And then when I finally she came to New York and she introduced me. He was sitting with Dustin Hoffman at a table at that restaurant right there. What was it? On 72nd Street, and the Italian place is gone. But and I just was terrified of him, and I couldn't understand a word he said because he really mangles the English language, and I just was like, "What did you say? What did you say?" And I was afraid of saying the wrong thing because he really was an intimidating guy, and but he became like a father figure to me. I mean, Gary Sherman is I can count them on one hand really, and I don't think there's anyone in the world I love more than Gary Sherman right here. But like these guys stood in the gap for my dad and told me who he was, and he said, this is really important. He said. To my mother, my children will know me through my music. And this was one of those things I also heard growing up, like, what does that mean? What does Twist and Shout and Hang on Sloopy tell me about this guy? So, it was like a mystery and a riddle. I think what he meant was you dig deep and you'll really find it because it's in those songs and it's the autobiographical lyrics. And it was also in meeting his friends because these guys really, let me know who my dad was better than anything I could have done. So,
it was a journey of self-discovery for you too.
Yeah.
And Gary, when did you meet Bert?
I guess I met him in the early 60s. I was doing a lot of hit records at the time. And in fact,
Were you working for Atlantic Records? Or
no,
were you like a freelance?
I worked for everybody.
Right.
And I was with Lieber and Stoller, who you saw in the film, working on a Drifters album. And all of a sudden, the secretary comes in and said, Bert wants to play a song for you from the Drifters album. And I was just sitting there. And he walked into that room, and I was mesmerized. It was just,
Now, Brett said you're a medical doctor who got into music?
I'm
and you were
a biomechanical podiatric physician.
a podiatrist, foot doctor.
At Rutgers,
Oh, wow.
Billie Jean, a whole bunch of things. Yeah. But he walked into that room, and he sat down on a chair, he picked up his guitar, and he was just unbelievable. He made that guitar sound like a full orchestra. And he sang the song, and Jerry Mike didn't like the song. However, he came back and he did Up on the Roof afterwards with him and a whole bunch of other things. But that was my first time
Did
I
he
met
know
him.
how to read and write music, or were you the guy who took what he was able to do kind of naturally and put it into...
It's complicated. I mean, usually when he had a song like we would be doing Freddie Scott or "Moment for Me, Baby," he played the song for me, and I'd write down the chords and melodies and all that stuff. And on that song in particular, it's really interesting. He took out a record, I think it was Sam Cooke, and this is how sensitive he was to music. He said, "I like the sound of that ride cymbal." Out of the whole record. He says, "I want to use it on Freddie's album."
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
how many people even know what a ride cymbal is? Anyone in the audience know what a ride cymbal is? So that was what it was who played it, and he trusted me. It's amazing, you have an experience with someone, you either connect with them or you don't, and we just connected. And he trusted me, and I just knew what he wanted. So when we go with Irma Franklin, I knew exactly what he wanted. Like I said, Freddie Scott or Van Morrison. He just put me in the room with Van, and I worked with Van. And that was a really interesting session, Van Morrison Brown Eyed Girl session, because I had a policy back then. I hated music contractors, because they were usually terrible musicians, and they always took advantage of musicians. And so I had a policy that I would hire the musicians myself and make the most important musician on the session contractor. So when we were doing that, I was thinking, gee, Eric Gale, who was just an unbelievable guitarist, he's probably the greatest guitarist of all time. He played the guitar, he was a chemist. He was soulful and extremely intellectual, and what he was able to do on the guitar was really amazing.
What are some of the other records he might have played guitar on?
He played on hundreds and hundreds of records. All those, Gary Chester, Paul Griffin. You saw them in the background. They would be first call for Burt Bacharach. They'd be first call for Phil Spector. They'd be first call for Jerry Lieber, Mike Starr. They were just first call musicians because they were so great. And so I said, I think I'll make, since it's the guitar, I wanted to add some soul to Van. I get a soulful guitarist like Eric. So I called him up and I said, Eric, I want you to contract a date. I want you and McCracken, your guitar. And so I go through the guys. He says, I want to play bass. I said, Eric, you're the greatest guitarist in the world. Why would I want you to play bass? I got dozens of bass players I can call on. He says, I play the bass like no one else does. I play it with a pick. You have to understand the recording business, the bass up until that time was very hard to record. We never got a good sound on it. And so I'm not going to argue with Eric. I mean, he's great. So instead we got Al Gorgoni, and we had Julie McCracken, great guitarist, Al Gorgoni. Eric played bass, Gary Chester, Paul Griffin. And we went into the studio. And Eric's bass was so fabulous that we were running down the chart, and in the middle, Bert, you usually press this microphone here in the studio, the control booth. He says, let's open up the chart and give Eric a bass solo. And because it was phenomenal. And of course, I'm sure most of you know the record, and right in the middle you hear that great bass solo by the world's greatest guitarist. It's ironic,
Now, Brett, you're committed to making the movie. You've interviewed Vosel. Do you just pick up the phone and call Paul McCartney and Keith Richards? And I mean, how did you end up getting all these? I mean, I'm Bert Berns' son, and I'm making a movie, and
no, it was. I felt like if I got their heroes into the film, and I started editing in the process. I again never made a home movie, but I became pretty proficient in Final Cut 7 and 10, and I really kind of was building the film, so I had something to show them. Look at Solomon Burke, look at Gary Sherman, look at Sissy Houston, look at all these people in the film. You guys.
So did you know any of these people like Sissy, or you had some relationships that connected you to others?
I mean, really, I only knew. The people I knew the closest were Wazel and Jerry Ragavoy, and then when I met Gary, but I didn't really know that many of these people. I mean, if Bob Sarles, my co-director, were here, he would say that one of the remarkable things that I did, because I did all these interviews, and these people everyone, Gary, all of them, they all just sort of poured their hearts out to me because I was the son, and I think that had the different kind of wasn't a performance. It was really from the heart, and they were just relaxed. They all cried in their interviews, and a lot of them did. And then sort of at the end, it was like, okay, now we're gonna go get like for me, it was I wanted Van, I wanted Keith, I wanted Paul. I wanted Neil Diamond. I'm sure that when we do open this to questions, everybody says, what happened to Neil Diamond? So I'll wait and see if that's something that's interesting to you guys. But, everybody else we got.
Is he still pissed off?
I think he's still pissed off. Yeah. Because things got really...
You had said something about Jimmy Page. Did your dad work with Led Zeppelin?
Yeah, when I said Jimmy Page is another one that got away from me as an interview subject, but really, my father discovered him during the Them sessions in London, so that's him on Baby Please Don't Go, and it's Jimmy Page on Here Comes the Night. He played on all those sessions, and my father fell in love with him and recognized his genius, and he brought him to New York to be a session musician, to work with these guys. And Ahmet and Jerry were like, the same thing, like, what do you want him for? We got Eric Gale, we got the greatest music guitarist in the world, and they wouldn't give him a visa. And so he lived with us for 6 weeks in the penthouse. My mother put him to work changing my diapers. That was my claim to fame until it still is. And then my dad sent him back to London because he couldn't get him the visa. Never told him about Ahmet and Jerry being the sort of reason why it didn't work out. And my father died, and Jimmy recorded a song called Tribute to Bert Berns on Led Zeppelin 1. And it was the only song that didn't get included on Led Zeppelin 1, and you probably can ask yourself, well, why not? Because like Ahmet and Jerry, who just came within an inch of their lives, battling with Bert, I don't think on their huge new act, Led Zeppelin, they were going to have, Tribute to Bert Berns. So it came out in a box set in 1993. Actually, it's called Baby Come On Home. They changed it from Tribute to Bert Berns. So that's my Jimmy Page story. But I couldn't get him in the film. He kept saying, or as people would say, we'll try to do it now, we'll try to do it then. But, it's like wrangling rock stars is like, it's impossible. Yeah.
Brett, you said that, is this still on? There was a kind of a ticking clock for you. I mean, some of these people that you interviewed aren't with us any longer, right?
Yeah, in fact, that was really the sort of the main driving force to start making this film. Was Wazzle took me to meet Freddie Scott, and I was so excited, to meet Freddie Scott, and to go to one of those sort of concerts, oldies concerts, and Freddie performed "Are You Lonely for Me, Baby," and I met him afterwards, and I was just like, wow, how great is this? And then a few weeks later, Freddie died. And I just thought, my God, I've got to start getting these interviews because we're losing this generation. So I just raced, and interviewed as many people as I could, as fast as I could.
I mean, one of the things I love about this movie, there's been a lot of great music docs, 20 Feet from Stardom, I thought was fantastic, but there really hasn't been one about a producer. And these songs seem to be so sui generis, like McCartney's, they just come into the world and they exist and they feel like scripture and we all lived and experienced them, and you never think for a minute about who was the guy, kind of maybe the performers, maybe the writer, but I love that scene when you actually see Bert producing Betty Harris, Dark Outside, and I guess that audio track, there was no video or film of your dad.
No, we had to make the film without a single frame of video. I mean, there's none in the world, so it was amazing, like getting Stephen Van Zandt to do the narration, brought Bert into the film. There was sort of, we used everything that was at our disposal because there was no video at all. It got lost along the way, and there's a bunch of terrible, sad stories about that, but so that audio was
Where
the first time.
Where did you find that audio? Or when did
it's on outtakes on a Betty Harris CD one day. I just started listening to it, and there was my dad's voice, and it was the first time and only time I'd ever heard it spoken like that, other than some of the tracks where he was singing.
Wow. Yeah, it's very moving.
Another thing about Bert, he had such intensity of communicating with people, and he would work and work and work until he got a great performance. An example is "Are You Lonely for Me, Baby?" How many takes was that? 120? Yeah. He would not let up on Freddie until he got that emotion out of him. Solomon Burke referred to that in a movie. He just knew how to move musicians, how to get the most out of musicians, out of singers. Sissy, and Sissy, you don't really realize it, but she had a a group called the Inspirations. They were on every record in the 60s. I mean, everybody used it, whether they black or white, it didn't matter. But Bert communicated, and you saw Sissy making the remarks of how great it was to work with. He was just fabulous, very, very, very special person, and really wonderful. I really loved him.
And kind of that white soul brother thing. I mean, he obviously just had a gift that allowed him to be authentic.
Yeah.
In that world.
Yeah.
Let me open up to you guys. Any questions in the audience for our guests?
You mentioned you heard your father's voice, the tracks we found on outtakes. I was struck by the incredible videos of even the Beatles, that when they were talking about your dad's song. I had never seen that before. And the Exciters, when they were, I guess it was the Central Park Zoo they were singing in front of. Where did you find those things?
I mean, that's a Paris Zoo. It's the Paris Zoo, and they were wearing red dresses, and the lions were coming really close, and they thought they were going to eat them. It was really terrifying for them. But Bob Sarles and his wife, Christina Keating, they're world-class documentary filmmakers, especially music docs, and they know where all this kind of B-roll and stuff is buried, and it was just phenomenal what they found along the way. I brought them on to edit the film, and I thought, we'll spend about a few months putting on some bells and whistles and polish it up. And he ended up spending a year just taking my edit, smashed it into 10,000 pieces on the floor, and put it back together again. And the work that he did was so transformative that I, would have been remiss not to give him a co-director credit. So he really, really earned it.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Did you ever think to talk about the fact that this is your dad? I mean, I was kind of struck that you efface yourself completely from the film. It's only when you started talking I realized it was actually your dad you'd make the film about. So isn't that surprising that didn't become more part of the film?
That I wasn't in the film?
Yes.
Yeah, I think, I felt like it was just smarter, not to be in the film. Like, my sister would represent, the three children. And as the director, I thought, I just made a creative decision just to sort of, leave me out. So there's going to be DVD extras, and I might actually end up, in the DVD extras, because I did do an interview, but we decided not to use it.
Now, there's some other plans you have in terms of your dad's story. We want to talk about what else you've been doing.
Yeah, so, I mean, this is part of what the New York Times called the Burns Boomlet. We really, we felt like the only way we were going to get him recognized for his part in, music history was to tell this story. And so, we thought, well, let's just go at it from every different direction, and every media. And, nobody wanted to know about Bert Berns. I would, go to the Songwriter Hall of Fame dinner and spend money and put on a, tuxedo, and they would just look at me like, get out of here, eat the river chicken and take a hike. They didn't want to know. People didn't, I feel like, as long as some of these people were still alive, we were going to be able to tell this story, because it was just too difficult for a lot of these guys. And, so I just feel like, okay, we're going to tell the story, and we're going to tell it, warts and all, and as truthful as we can be, and it's not going to be a vanity piece. It's going to be a straight up story, and we're going to throw my dad on the sword at times, because everybody, I look at it like what he did with Neil Diamond might have been too heavy handed, but we weren't going to be the ones covering that up. We were going to let it come out. So my sister and I wrote a draft of a musical, like a Jersey Boy style musical telling our dad's story before we even started really with the film, and that really just took off and became like the lead project. And we got to New York, we met our playwright Daniel Goldfarb, and we were at New York Theater Workshop when all of a sudden doing readings and workshops where Rent and Once and these great musicals and plays have come from this theater company in the East Village. And then we were at Vassar College in New York Stage and Film doing, the sort of summer living in the dorms, and Hamilton was there right at the same time we were, and it was like, we didn't know Hamilton was going to be, as huge as it was. But we really developed the musical over the course of 7-8 years in the non-for-profits. We were off Broadway in 2014 at the Signature Theater, and we're aiming for Broadway in this year, while as the film comes out in the spring, sometime in the fall or the winter. We're bringing the musical to Broadway, so it's a lot of different projects.
I saw it on Broadway, and it was really a lot of fun. I took my daughter, and she loved it, and
And Gary Sherman is our arranger orchestrator, and that was like, if I have any genius I can claim, like any kind of like stroke of like how did I pull that off, was getting Gary to leave his cushy job as a doctor at Rutgers and you know, come every day into the city and stand in the shoes of Bert Berns, and he has done that. And the New York Times gave us our pull quote, gorgeously tuneful, you know, which you'll see all over our advertisements coming up. But that was Gary Sherman, and you know, a lot of other people. But he kept the songs close to the spirit of what we wanted from my dad's music, without letting them become too theatricalized. But also, they do tell the story. So, yeah, the musical is something I'm, you know, so proud of. But this film has just taken off, and I can't believe it.
Yeah.
I just went to see the show at the Jewish Museum on Bill Graham. I don't know if you saw it, but I was wondering if your father and Bill Graham crossed paths, or if they knew each other, if you know about that.
I don't really know. He's in the film. There's a moment where Bill Graham is like clapping in the mambo scene, you know, so like he has a cameo, and we were even going to point it out and put his name as a lower third, but we just thought, you know, it'll just be something that only a few people will notice. Yeah, I don't know. I never was able to find any connection where they might have worked together. It was Sid Bernstein that he worked with. I mean, it's amazing who he did work with, you know, and when I think like, well, how did he get away with, you know, not working with some, you know, certain artist or person, because he was so prolific and he was all over the place. He was working at every label. It wasn't just at Atlantic. He was working, I mean, we have the 45s. There's every label you can imagine, you know, from New York and around the country. So he was the first producer to go to England, you know, and work over there. He was he created Uptown Soul music with Solomon Burke and these guys. I mean, these were the first soul records ever made. I mean, the guy was just doing so many things, and it was just, you know, really, I mean, I'm sorry, I forgot even what the question was.
It's about Bill Graham.
Oh, that's right. What did that do with Bill Graham?
Yeah.
Are there any plans to make a collection of his records, or you know, make it as a collection that people can enjoy it?
Yeah, Ace Records in the UK, the British have always been, you know, just huge Bert Berns fans, even before I, you know, could even get anybody to pay attention here. They put out 3 CDs of the Bert Berns Story, which has been pretty great. We're releasing a soundtrack to the film on a major label. It just happened this week. I can't say who it is yet, but one of the major labels is releasing a soundtrack. So they're, yeah, I think Spotify playlists, you know, so that my children can listen to it, because that's all the only place they listen to music.
So the movie is coming out end of April, and you guys are the messengers, so please spread the word. I don't know what kind of social media you're on, but just with your friends. You know, these movies need all the love they can out in the world to, you know, find an audience, and I think this is just such a special evening that anybody of any generation would love and connect to and take something away with. So thank you guys so much.
And thank you.
See us on Broadway.
Have a great